Hello, testing the sound. 1, 2, 3. Pull my chair up a little bit here. Like sinking into the floor. No, that's a little too tall. Hello, testing the sound. 1, 2, 3. It looks like the microphone's working. Just gonna put my phone on mute here, and I'm gonna pause the YouTube live stream here so it doesn't slow down my computer. If there's any ladies and gentlemen out there, just kind of chime in. Let me know if you can hear it. Let me know if you can see the screen of Jordan Peterson on YouTube here. And we'll kind of just go from there. It's looking and sounding good. Yeah, the mic was a little bit hot so I'm going to try not to get all over the mic here. When I did a couple test recordings, and it did seem a little hot. You guys might hear some people thumping and bumping upstairs. So we can just kind of hang out for a couple of minutes. I'll just kind of see who shows up before I kind of start introducing what we're going to be discussing. Hope everybody's having a good week. Really busy day for me. Had to work twice today because somebody called out. Then I had to go to my art class. Some of you guys might have seen the drawings on Instagram. Not sure what this is. So it's just been a really busy day. Been doing tons of reading. And I shared it everywhere. Cool. I should probably share it too. I shared it on Instagram. But it was kind of short notice, but I just wanted to kind of get on here and kind of test out the equipment. Shout out to Charles Vegan Cheetah for helping me set all this up. We got T. Denny. We got Tom Denny in the chat. Shout out to my buddy Tom Denny. We're going to be discussing Jordan Peterson a little bit here. Before we get into that, I just want to give you guys a little update on the Halloween horror live stream that we're going to be doing, the occult horror live stream. And no, it's not going to be on Halloween. It's probably going to be on Monday evening. I'm planning for this coming Monday. But we did knock out all the books. So we finished Haunting of Hill House. We finished The Howling. And we also finished The Entity by Frank De Felita. So just stay tuned. Look for updates. I'm already working on the thumbnail. So we're going to be doing that really soon as well. Hope you're doing well out in Texas, Tom. So if everything looks and sounds good, I think we'll get started here. Unless you guys are expecting some more people to come, we can wait a few more minutes. But let me just kind of introduce Jordan Peterson. He doesn't need too much of an introduction. And most of you guys are probably familiar with Jordan Peterson already, I would assume. And hopefully I'll be able to offer some new information, or we're sort of going to try to pull back the veneer of Jordan Peterson a little bit. I'm not going to give him a completely free pass. We're going to talk about sort of the trajectory of what I relate to in his sort of philosophical dialogue, and also some of the red flags that come up. We're also going to discuss some of the elite connections that Jordan Peterson has, and we're also going to discuss his benzodiazepam addiction, as well as his strange wife, Tammy, I think her name is, and his pretty fairly preposterous diet that he promotes. So we're going to kind of get into all that within the next hour, and we'll just kind of see how long it goes. I do have to take a small break, like a 2-minute break, just to take some food out of the oven because I haven't had a chance to eat today. I'm not going to eat on camera, but I just have to make sure I don't burn the food. We're making a vegetarian lasagna tonight. So just to kind of get started, we're going to discuss Jordan Peterson in the context of his book, 12 Rules for Life. Now, I did take the cover off of it, but it has a pretty epic cover. This is kind of what it looks like here. This is just the spine of the book. I feel like I'm hunching over, so I'm just gonna put the mic up a little bit more like that. So we're gonna sort of unpack Jordan Peterson in the context of 12 Rules for Life, right? But we're sort of gonna include the interesting things that we discussed, like his benzodiazepam addiction. Going to talk about some of his philosophies, as well as some of his relationships, as well as the ridiculous meat, salt, and water diet that he allegedly sticks to without fail. Not sure how true that is. Hey, Marissa, what's going on? Thank you for sharing the live stream. Shout out to Sunset City. Shout out to Tom Denny and Charles Marlowe and whoever else may be out there. I know you're there. Let's try to get to 5 likes. I know you guys can do it. And then we will, go on from there. So let's sort of unpack 12 Rules for Life. Now, I know my brother actually read this book. Some of you folks might be familiar with the book. And it's sort of a philosophical, psychoanalytical self-help, sort of in the vein of Robert Greene, I guess you could say, like 48 Laws of Power or Mastery or Art of Seduction, but it's also more heavily focused on how to apply religion into sort of psychoanalyzing yourself to implement sort of your life's path into the context of the greater good of humanity. So he does have a lot of really interesting things in here that I think are worth mentioning. But there's also some red flags. There's a lot of word craft. So we'll just, I do have a lot of sticky notes. We got the slow boy sticky notes here. So we're going to be investigating those, and I'll kind of use the sticky notes to kind of get us from point A to point B, right? So the introduction of this book was written by a man named Norman Doidge, and he's sort of like an elite psychologist, right? And sort of clinical psychology in itself is sort of in the realm of pseudoscience. And Jordan Peterson, if I forgot to mention, he is a clinical psychologist / professor / propagandist from Alberta, Canada. Not sure where he lives now. And he was sort of, maybe through no fault of his own, sort of hijacked and sort of promoted by sort of maybe the far right movement that sort of came up, during the initial stages of the Donald Trump escapade, right, back in 2015, 2016. Jordan Peterson kind of came on the scene roughly sometime after that. He started uploading YouTube videos and videos of his lectures and stuff like that. He was sort of implementing this anti-woke agenda, or this, I wouldn't say Jordan Peterson himself is far right, but he definitely sort of has this more conservatively progressive agenda or narrative that goes in complete contrast with, I guess, the woke generation, if that's a thing. And we'll be using some word craft ourselves, far right, neo-Marxist, that kind of thing, just to kind of explain, just to sort of open up the dialogue of the people that we're talking about. I'm not saying that I believe all these entities exist or they're actual movements, but I think it's important to, what's up, Camille? Thank you for joining. What's up, Monerjo, Tome? We got all kinds of cool people in here, so hope you guys will enjoy this. It's going to be a really long-winded stream, so feel free to kind of pop in and out. I don't expect you guys to hold your piss to watch this, but that would be awesome if you did. So the introduction, we're going to start unpacking the book. So the introduction was written by a man named Norman Doidge, who was sort of another elite psychologist, clinical psychologist. I keep forgetting that term. So I'm actually going to jot that down because I keep wanting to say something else. Clinical psychologist, whatever that is. And Jordan Peterson sort of comes from being inspired by people like Sigmund Freud and perhaps Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, and also the other guy, who's the guy that talked about the shadow, Carl Jung. So Jordan Peterson kind of takes, as far as his clinical psychologist output goes, I guess you could say, or his philosophy goes, he kind of merges all three of those and maybe several other psychoanalyst ideas and kind of, spits forth his own version of that, right? But he's also pretty heavily well read, in this book. 12 Rules for Life, we see references to Dostoevsky. We see there's a heavily biblical influence involved as well. And there's even some Shakespeare references. So he's very well read. Now, Jordan Peterson has been sort of critiqued for the, he kind of talks about this term neo-Marxism and postmodernism. There's speculation that he doesn't really quite understand the sort of the essence of Marxism, or even what the actual definition of postmodernism is, and we kind of see that a lot. I mean, even I sort of use that word craft sometimes. But in my videos, like, I'm kind of just riffing on like what I kind of hear with other sort of maybe conspiracy or sort of literature or movie or sort of social, religious YouTubers that I see, and I kind of take those words because I think they're funny, and I just kind of riff on them. So maybe Jordan Peterson is kind of doing that too, and sometimes we kind of use those words interchangeably or perhaps out of context. But anyway, the introduction was written by another clinical psychologist named Norman Doidge, and I do think it's interesting that Jordan Peterson... Okay, I want to unpack this as intellectually and as sort of, how do I say, non-offensive as I can. But it's interesting. Jordan Peterson is interesting because he gets away with a lot, right? In terms, like, he's never been canceled. I mean, he's kind of going through sort of a current attempted cancel by the psychology community at some Canadian university. They're trying to cancel him for various reasons, for maybe not only his political beliefs, but also just the way the direction he's taken clinical psychology as a whole. But at the same point in time, Jordan Peterson has never really been canceled, and he does get away with a lot. And it sort of reminds me of Howard Stern or somebody like that. Howard Stern is much more extreme, right? But in terms of Jordan Peterson, you have to kind of wonder, who are they connected to? Are these people controlled? Who's backing sort of this far-right Jordan Peterson movement, right? Now, obviously, most of his ideas are his own, I would presume, but he also has connections to, he wrote some scripts or some, I don't know what he wrote for them exactly, but he has connections to the United Nations and stuff like that. So there's definitely some levels that I think are worth pulling back. And when I talked about how does he get away with it and who is he connected to, the Norman Doidge fella just happens to be a pretty famous Jewish clinical psychologist. So I think, I'm not trying to sound like an anti-Semite or a conspiracy theorist or anything, but I think it does help to have successful or powerful Jewish people sort of helping you out, or just on your side, or in sort of the same philosophical, intellectual school that you come from. That probably could be why he gets away with a lot, because he knows people in high places, right? Whether they're Jewish, whether they're Chinese, or whether they're American. I just mentioned the Jewish thing just because, I think it's interesting, and Jordan Peterson is constantly reiterating the struggles and the tyranny and the terrible history of the Holocaust. He reminds his readers of that constantly, and he sort of takes those historical tragedies and shows us how we can learn from them, right? So I did think that was interesting. Maybe he kind of threw that in, the whole Holocaust thing, to maybe impress some of his publishers or something. I do see that a lot in books. But let's get to this other part about Jordan Peterson, which I think is interesting. Let me see here. Jordan Peterson also previously wrote a book called Maps of Meaning, which was sort of how to... I haven't read the book myself. This is my first, sort of experience with reading Jordan Peterson. But from what I took out of Maps of Meaning, from what I understand, is sort of how to extract meaning on a philosophical and sort of a religious level, sort of maybe in the vein of 12 Rules for Life, but it's a little more in depth. Apparently he spent 15 years writing the book, which is pretty cool, so he works pretty hard. I'll try to catch up with the comments here in a little bit. I do want to get through this. So we have references to Jung, Freud, and Nietzsche, and Eliot Newman, just different clinical psychologists. So I did want to mention something else here if I can find it. Where did I highlight this? Okay, so Norman Doidge is discussing his visits to Jordan Peterson and Tammy Peterson's house, and he says the following: they had art, some carved masks, and abstract portraits, but they were overwhelmed by a huge collection of original socialist realist paintings of Lenin, not John Lennon, but I think this is like the Marxist Lenin or something. I'm not real familiar with Lenin, but said realist painters of Lenin and the early communist commissioned by the USSR. So then he goes on to say, not long after the Soviet Union fell and most of the world breathed a sigh of relief, Peterson began purchasing this propaganda for a song online. I'm not sure what he means by that. But he goes on to say, painting, lionizing the Soviet revolutionary spirit completely filled every single wall. So anyway, make a long story short, Jordan Peterson has a weird art collection, which is kind of weird, right? There's a lot of weird people out there, weird successful people with weird art collections. Doesn't necessarily mean he's weird or he's involved in anything nefarious, but it was just sort of another one of those red flag moments. It reminds me of sort of like, John Podesta or something with his weird art collection. Dare I go there? So to understand ideology, this is Norman Doidge writing in the intro. Jordan read extensively about not only the Soviet Gulag, but also the Holocaust and the rise of Nazism. I had never before met a person born Christian and of my generation who was so utterly tormented by what happened in Europe to the Jews and who had worked so hard to understand how it could have occurred. I too had studied this in depth. My own father survived Auschwitz. So, I think it's really interesting that they're discussing the Holocaust. I think it's important to be reminded of the Holocaust, but I'm just wondering maybe if Jordan Peterson is maybe not being 100% honest about his potential lineage. Maybe he does have some links to, maybe some of his forefathers or something were in Auschwitz or something, or maybe he has some Jewish people in his family. I just thought it was interesting. We also have, so let's skip a little bit ahead here. Let's see here. He did reference Richard Dawkins, who is an atheist. Now, I think Jordan Peterson has done a couple debates with Richard Dawkins as well. So that's another thing about Jordan Peterson you have to remember is that he sort of presents this sort of agenda of this pro-Christian sort of worldview, right? But is he really a Christian? I mean, I think that would be hard to kind of discover. It would be hard to sort of decipher that. He claims to be a Christian, but he sort of puts Christianity in the context of, how do I say, like political discourse. So he's sort of using Christianity outside of its original source. Obviously Christianity was used to sort of implement political agendas and stuff like that, but I do think it's interesting how, and I think one reason Jordan Peterson may do that is because he knows that will sort of appeal to sort of maybe the far right people or something, right? That's another possibility. So we have some more references to Freud here. Not too much else in the, okay, so I did want to talk a little bit about the word craft here. And it's right here. Let me see where it is. Or is it on this page? I'm not sure where exactly. So I got my annotations here, but I can't find what I'm looking for. But even in the introduction, we see this the writer setting up. He's throwing out these words like neo-Marxism, postmodernism, stuff like that. So that automatically sort of like, I think they know, they're sort of preaching to the choir, right? They sort of know the type of people that may be reading this book. And I'm sure Jordan Peterson has a lot of different diverse readers, right? But I think they do know, and I think it's interesting that this book just happened to come out in 2018 during, Donald Trump's administration and all that. So here in the introduction we have this idea of virtue signaling, and that is definitely sort of a red flag in terms of wordcraft, in terms of the far right sort of maybe how do I say, I don't want to say deep state, but sort of like a politically motivated dialogue, postmodern, neo-Marxism, virtue signaling. And then if you ask like somebody from the far left, when you ask them about virtue signaling, that's like the worst thing in the world. And they've deconstructed the concept to sort of implement this idea that virtue signaling that term was just created to sort of stamp out any opposition for social justice, which I don't really think it is, but it was sort of maybe invented. That term virtue signaling, that sort of popped up during the far right maybe movement, I would guess. At some point, maybe not this particular far right movement with Donald Trump and stuff like that, but maybe somewhere along the line before that. So that's kind of what the introduction is. It's just sort of like this other clinical psychologist talking about how great Jordan Peterson is and just a little bit about his background and stuff. So let's see what else kind of stood out to me. And I'm not really going to talk about the actual rules themselves. I will discuss them a little bit. But I do want to. You guys are talking about Obama. I don't think he talks about Obama in here, but so let's, obviously it's called the 12 Rules for Life. So we talked a little bit about maps of meaning and sort of his thesis. He says here, from 1985 until 1999, I worked for about 3 hours a day on the only other book I have ever published, Maps of Meaning, the Architecture of Belief. During this time, in the 3 years since, I also taught a course on the material in that book at Harvard. So Jordan Peterson taught at the University of Toronto as well as Harvard. So he's working at Harvard already. That's, he must have some pretty good connections or one hell of a resume, you know what I mean? But that is in part because I became embroiled in a political controversy that drew on inordinate amount of attention. That's another story, maybe even another book. I propose in Maps of Meaning that the great myths and religious stories of the past, particularly those derived from an earlier oral tradition, were moral in their intent rather than descriptive. So in Maps of Meaning, he's sort of constructing this idea that something like the Bible and also other forms of ancient intellectual, spiritual dialogue can be used to morally sort of upright the world as a whole, right? And he sort of has this idea, which I partly agree with, that the Bible and religion is not, this antiquated, outdated sort of thing that sort of the postmodern movement, right, has sort of tried to do. Postmodernism, or maybe, the mainstream media, stuff like that, has sort of tried to deconstruct religion in favor of a more, perhaps Darwinian or maybe like Richard Dawkins-esque sort of ideology that there's no God and, we all came from Africa and all this kind of rather controversial stuff, but stuff that is never seen as such. It's always seen as like the gospel, right? But that's another problem with Jordan Peterson, is that whatever he preaches, whatever he talks about, it's like the gospel. And I think that's what a lot of Jordan Peterson's followers, especially, he has a majority of male followers, and they tend to kind of worship him, not like on a, maybe not to the level of Trump, but like Jordan Peterson is in some ways kind of like the intellectual, philosophical version of Trump. I guess we could maybe speculate, right? Like he sort of has that pull on his followers. Maybe I'm just kind of judging too harshly, but I would assume that a lot of his followers are intellectuals. They're not like bumpkins living out in, no man's land or something. They're not like uneducated necessarily, but I do think, I think even somebody like me, when I originally started hearing Jordan Peterson, he was kind of saying all the things I wanted to hear, right? But after reading his book and just kind of studying some of the questions that came up with Jordan Peterson, like, I'm not really, well, let's get into that later, because I don't want to, get ahead of the game here. But anyway, so we talked about maps of meaning. So we're going to fast forward a little bit here. In the first chapter, he sort of automatically sort of starts to, the whole first chapter is this metaphor of how we can learn better mating skills by studying lobsters, right? And it was quite interesting. It was quite compelling. But he sort of talks about how you have to conduct yourself in society, in the world, by being upright, sticking your chest out and just being confident, because that's what the male lobster does, and that's how he gets all the female lobsters and all this kind of stuff. So he's kind of already sort of appealing to maybe the machismo, sort of maybe lower astral type thing, or concepts that he thinks maybe his followers would want to hear. And it's stuff like that along with his meat, salt, and water diet, which I think is completely preposterous, but that's another sort of cue towards the people that he thinks might be interested in his content. So what I'm assuming is that some of the things, hey, what's up, Newly Awakened? Shout out to Newly Awakened for joining the chat. Humans are just like lobsters. Yeah, they are in some ways. But Jordan Peterson was sort of saying like we were exactly like them. And maybe in some ways we are on like a primal sensual level perhaps, but there's so many, I would say humans are far more complex, right? So that just kind of stuck out to me, the whole way that he constructed the first chapter of the book, sort of talking about mating. And I think the more of the essence was less on how to get sexual partners, and more about just how to be a confident person. So that's all fine and well, but it's kind of already been done before, right? We've already heard from Tony Robbins how to be confident. Like maybe there could have been something a little more interesting. Let me see here. There's a good quote here. It says, to those who have everything, more will be given. To those who have nothing, everything will be taken. And that really stood out to me. And I believe that is a quote from what Christ said to Matthew in the section 25-29 from the New Testament. Obviously, I think Matthew's in the New Testament. To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken. And that's just sort of what we experience in life. So I really enjoyed how he kind of put that in there. And this book is very heavily based in biblical sort of literature, right? Biblical philosophy, perhaps. Which I'm Orthodox Christian, right? But I don't consider myself, I've yet to really be 100% convinced of the actual, what the true manifestation, or I've yet to see true proof of God or any of that stuff, right? But I sort of live my life sort of similar to Jordan Peterson. I know a lot of other Orthodox people do this too, unless you're like an extreme Orthodox or something, like something more along the lines of, something more extreme. But as far as Orthodoxy goes, I try to use the principles, to implement an interest in my own spirituality, how to be a better person, and also sort of the history aspect, just learning about the Bible, learning about Jesus. But doesn't necessarily mean that I believe Jesus walked on water, right? So I think the truth is somewhere in between. But I do really like that quote there. Okay, so we're going to fast forward a little bit here. Let's see here. He says, this is why when we are defeated, we act very much like lobsters who have lost a fight. He's still going on about the lobsters here, guys. Our posture droops. We face the ground. We feel threatened, hurt, anxious, and weak. If things did not improve, we become chronically depressed. And he's pretty down to earth. Like he'll kind of hit you in the face with these like harsh realities and stuff. And he talks a little bit about the Darwinian perspective and the dominance hierarchy. And he sort of believes that, sort of historically or biologically speaking, there's something known as the dominance hierarchy. And it kind of makes sense. Like everybody has to live according to somewhat of a dominance hierarchy, because if you don't pursue any type of dominance in society, then you just kind of get crushed. It's like a cardboard baler, so it's not to say that people, it's not necessarily a nihilistic approach to society, but I do think that's maybe part of it. Okay, so we'll fast forward a little bit here, and we're going to try to hit some of the other topics. He doesn't talk too much about his benzodiazepam addiction, but if you guys are familiar with, in this particular book, he doesn't. That's more like in his online lectures and stuff, but you guys might be familiar that he was a former benzodiazepam addict, and he claims they put him on it I'm not sure exactly what genre of benzodiazepams. I assume it was maybe Valiums or something like that, or Xanax. But he was heavily addicted to benzodiazepams. And then he talks about the terrible, almost deathly, devilish, unwieldy withdrawals that took place. And it's actually called, what is it called? Akathisia, which is the sort of the body's reaction to the benzo withdrawal, and it makes you feel like, your skin is crawling. You have to constantly move, and he did some interviews with his daughter, mind you. He's always being interviewed by his daughter or his wife or somebody, and that brings me to another point about Jordan Peterson. We're getting a little bit away from the book here, but I just want to include this, is that in terms of what I've seen, he kind of preaches to the choir. Like, he speaks at a lot of Canadian universities or like places that he knows he'll be well received. Like, I've yet to see Jordan Peterson, give a lecture in front of a woke college crowd or something, or like a Marxist BLM crowd. I mean, that would be interesting, but he doesn't necessarily put himself in situations where he can really be intellectually challenged. So he sort of constructs this, from what I've seen. I'm not saying this is 100% true, but he sort of, constructs the settings of his lectures and the settings of his YouTube output. It's all sort of, he knows exactly where his content is going to go and who it's going to reach and stuff. So it's a little bit like, sorry about that, my keyboard just fell. A little bit of a conflict of interest, I would say, maybe. So let's skip ahead a little bit here. He talks about agoraphobics. He talks about being bullied, simple stuff like that. And then he kind of gets into the book of Genesis here, which is pretty cool. Two stories of creations from two different Middle Eastern sources appear to be woven together in the Genesis account. In the chronologically first but historically more recent account, known as the Priestly, God created the cosmos using it. So he's sort of referencing, the origins of humanity, right? I'm not sure where he's exactly going with this, but he's drawing parallels to sort of philosophers like Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton and stuff like that. And Jordan Peterson, what you also get in this book is this interesting duality of order and chaos. And I actually forgot to mention, at the beginning of the book, he talks about why we need rules. And you can there's a couple of different ways you can approach, a book like 28 or 12 Rules for Life or whatever, right? On the surface level, yeah, it's a lot of corny sort of pseudo psychological hogwash that we've heard a million times, but there is actually some really, really interesting material in here. I think that's important to be aware of. I wouldn't say on the surface. I would say half of what he's doing, like we've already heard from Tony Robbins or Eckhart Tolle or, Infinite Waters or one of those, people like that. But the other 50% is like really, really interesting biblical history, really, really personal, interesting personal anecdotes and philosophy and psychology and, just a little bit of life advice, but when you read a book like 12 Rules for Life, it's like, it's difficult to put those things into practice, and you kind of have to create your own rules. It's not like you're going to be, just the whole structure of the book. Like I would never publish a book or write a book called Andrew's 12 Rules for Life or Andrew's, it just would be completely obscene. Like I was talking to my dad about this, and he's like, Jordan Peterson, he's a know-it-all, and I guess he kind of is, but he's, there's some other interesting layers there. But anyway, I interrupted myself, but he has this concept of this philosophy of chaos versus order. And in sort of a biblical religious sense, or even a psychological sense, it makes perfect sense. Like chaos is, he sort of gave references to like chaos is like Smaug in Lord of the Rings, or like chaos is like the dwarves living underground, fighting orcs and goblins. And order is sort of like the elven forest where there's beauty and there's a divine society and sort of like that. And order is also derived from the Bible, and he sort of proves to us or sort of reveals to us that order, the structure of how we can apply order, we can get a lot of inspiration from the Bible itself. And make of that what you will. Like, you don't have to become a Bible thumper or anything like that, but I think, in terms of how a society could do better, or how you could live your life on a personal level, the Bible is a good sort of, and I'm not promoting Christianity or anything like that, but I do think it's good to have the Bible under your belt, even if that's all it is. Just having it under your belt is a good place to start, in terms of not only learning about history, but just to learn about how society could or should not function, rather. It's sort of threefold in that sense. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Really appreciate you guys sticking around. Hope this is not boring for you guys. Hope you guys are enjoying this. And I do encourage you guys to read this. I'm not getting on the stream here to bash Jordan Peterson or his book, because I'm actually not even quite finished with it. I have like another 20 pages left, but I was just really dying to get on here and kind of respond to it. And I do plan to make a more full-length, maybe concise video discussing some of these things. But I just wanted to really get on here and sort of discuss some of this. So here's a reference. Order is the Shire of Tolkien's hobbits, peaceful, productive, and safely inhabitable, even by the naive. Chaos is the underground kingdom of the dwarves, usurped by Smaug, the treasure-hoarding serpent. Chaos is the deep ocean bottom to which Pinocchio voyaged to rescue his father from Monstro, the whale and the fire-breathing dragon. So you kind of, he definitely sort of teaches you how to sort of extradite, I don't know if that's the right word, sort of take meaning out of whether it's the Bible or whether it's Pinocchio or the Lord of the Rings, and why we have these continual ancient stories that come up again and again about one man or one woman sort of defeating evil, going up against adversary. And that's the whole problem with movies now, and even books. It's like, how many Marvel movies can you watch when every woman is invincible and every woman takes on this overly dominant manly role, and there's no shortcomings in any of the characters in movies now or even books. Like, everybody's superhuman. Like in Star Wars, lightsabers are basically just like it can be fixed with a Band-Aid now. There's like, really, we don't really have that like real sort of like ancient idea of like facing adversary or challenges like we used to. And I think that's a really interesting thing that Jordan Peterson kind of points out for us, is that we need our characters and we need our lives to have sort of that element of adversary, to have those elements of challenge. So let's see here. He does talk a little bit about the Darwinian theory here. From a Darwinian perspective, nature, reality itself, the environment itself is what selects. He is really wordy sometimes. He doesn't like to use punctuation. Sometimes Jordan Peterson, his sentences will go on with ands. He'll be like, you will be depressed, and you will be sad, and you will be dysfunctional, and you will be angry. And I'm like, dude, just use a comma and take out the ands. But anyway, that's just a little critique of his writing. Like, I can't stand when people do that. Even Ernest Hemingway does that. And when in doubt, just take the and out and just put a comma. Just say angry, upset, sad, but even don't overuse that either. So we sort of have the duality of chaos versus order, and how bad the realm of chaos can take you to. And he talks about some of his childhood friends and stuff like that, who were just kind of ne'er-do-wells, hangers-ons, who sort of submitted to maybe the realm of chaos. They weren't motivated or something. And he talks about what order is, or what order means to him. Order for him. One thing I do respect about Jordan Peterson is that he does respect sort of the institution of marriage, or so he says, right? He's sort of an advocate for not having reckless sex, and not being a slave to your sexual sort of tendencies, your emotions, and he's a real firm believer in the institution of marriage. He's been married to Tammy allegedly for, now whether he's got side bays or something, it wouldn't surprise me, somebody like Jordan Peterson, but allegedly he's been married for like 15-20 years and all that good stuff. So he sort of promotes that sort of element of moral sanctity perhaps, but got some funny conversations going on in the comments there, but so we have sort of that duality of Jordan Peterson sort of machismo propaganda that he sort of promotes to his followers. But like, I wouldn't even say it's that, because he does talk a lot about marriage and stuff like that. But on the other hand, he sort of talks about how the postmodernist agenda or the neo-Marxist agenda is sort of, and I think he's right about some of this, but he's sort of saying that they're trying to, break apart men and women and make men into women and vice versa. But he's also sort of promotes like, men should be men and eat meat and that sort of thing too. So there's a little bit of a duality there, perhaps. Does keep his wife tight. What? Does keep his wife. There's like a heart in front of that comment there, so I can't see it. It does keep his wife tight-reined. I don't know if he does that necessarily, newly awakened. I mean, yeah, she's not in the public eye like he is, so maybe that's another red flag. Is he some type of cerebral narcissist and doesn't let his wife, speak or something? But I don't know. Like, I've seen them do interviews together, but the weird thing is the majority of people that interview him are Michaela, his daughter, or his wife. So it's like, it's a little weird, Anyways, we'll fast forward here. So we did cover a little bit about Jordan Peterson's benzodiazepam addiction. And I do want to stay structured in the text, right? Because I think that's where all the good information is. But I do want to pull up this article that I read that mentioned something a little bit weird about his wife, Tammy. I'll see if I can pull up a picture for you guys here. That's Michaela. I can just put a Tammy Peterson here. I think that's her name. So anyway, let's see how this pulls up here. Interesting couple, right? I mean, they look like they're happy and all this stuff, but I do get a little bit of like strange vibes a little bit from her. Like, I can't think of the woman I'm thinking of, that weird modern artist Maria Abramovich or something. She kind of just, something about her is a little weird. I don't know. She's not really in the public eye, so nobody really knows too much about her, but they've been married. They've been like friends since they were kids. But there's this part here that says, before dedicating herself to supporting her husband, Tammy worked as a massage therapist and has been actively involved in fostering children from Canadian orphanages since the age of 30. A little weird, that last part. Has been active since the age of 30 and fostering children from Canadian orphanages. Kind of like, I get like weird Madonna vibes that go in there, you know what I mean? Like those celebrities that go, and I don't, it's not very clear what they mean by that. And that does sort of relate to this other part here in this book where, let me see here. The rule number 3 is sort of unpacking Peterson's. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think of that little antidote. His wife is involved in adoptions. I'm just going to pull my thing up here so I can keep, I don't know. It was a little weird. I don't know what that means, or, it could be something, spirit cooking. That's what I was thinking. I'm not, that's a pretty far-fetched idea, but you just never know. You know what I mean? You just never know. So anyway, he goes into his background about, growing up in the cold wasteland. And he also has this, I'm trying to see if I can find this little part that dovetails really nicely with the thing we just said about Tammy. And if I can find it in here, I'll kind of read it for you here before I interrupt myself. I don't want to waste too much time looking through the text here if I can't find it. Okay, so I can't really find where it is exactly, but there's this scene, or there's this little anecdote when he's talking about when his kids were little, right? And they would have birthday parties and have kids sleep over or something. And there was this kid that was dropped off at his house or something, was friends with Michaela or his son Julian, I believe. And he said that the kid's father basically says, my son's not going to sleep. He wants to stay up all. If he can't get to sleep, let him go downstairs and watch Elmo or something. And And then, so I don't remember exactly what transpired, but Jordan Peterson attempted to get the kid to go to sleep, and he was sort of like, he would like, the kid would sit up in the crib or sit up in the bed like this, and then Jordan Peterson allegedly put him back down and would walk away, and then the kid would just get back. So they were playing this little game, right? And then eventually Jordan Peterson claims that the kid would not like submit to Jordan Peterson's authority, or he wouldn't do what he wanted him to do. He was just causing havoc or something and wanted to watch Elmo, right? So Jordan Peterson held the kid down or something until he fell asleep or something. And the way that Jordan Peterson wrote about it was kind of funny, because he was like, Jordan Peterson was saying there was no way in hell I was going to let that kid go down and watch that creepy puppet Elmo or something. But I just sort of got the sense that it was a little bit like sort of transgressing the boundaries of what you would do with a kid that wasn't yours. And I started sort of getting like Alfred Kinsey vibes or something when he was writing a little bit about that scene. So anyway, that was just a little anecdote. I'm not going to spend too much on that. If you guys can look more up about Alfred Kinsey as the time goes forward. But he does have this other interesting on page 63. It has this interesting idea that happy does not equal good. He says here, let's see here. That does not mean that you should do nothing for children except feed them candy. Happy is by no means synonymous with good. You must get children to brush their teeth. They must put on their snowsuits when they go outside in the cold, even though they might object strenuously. So he's talking sort of about how to get into the psychology of a kid, but he sort of applies it to adults, in that like we don't need to pursue instant gratification. In fact, according to Peterson, that is the worst thing you can do, is sort of live your life with this idea of instant gratification. Let me just check my, for some reason my alarm didn't go off. I will be right back. I'm just going to take something out of the oven, guys, and we'll be right back with you. Appreciate you guys sticking around. We're cooking some vegetarian lasagna. And no, we're not going to eat it on camera. I'm just going to save it for later. So where are we here? So we talked about, I like a lot of his philosophies, and that's kind of why I'm making this stream, because I don't necessarily say I agree with what he says, but I think he definitely gets the gears turning in your head about whether it's religion or politics or just, sort of in the realm of, I hate to say self-help, because I hate that genre. I don't read self-help books. Probably 12 Rules for Life and something by Robert Greene is probably the closest I will ever get to reading self-help. I used to read self-help when I was little, because my mother used to read self-help. I thought she was cool, and I wanted to read all of her Tony Robbins books or Eckhart Tolle books and stuff like that. But let me see here. So he goes into a little bit more about Freud, unpacking Freud, and he talks about how Sigmund Freud, when he would sit with his patients, right? Robert Greene is cool. Yeah, I agree. Jordan, that is not Andrew. Huh? But he talks about how Sigmund Freud wouldn't face his patients in the clinical sessions, and the reason for that is that according to Sigmund Freud, or any psychoanalyst for that matter, any clinical psychologist, when you're sitting there staring, even in conversation he talks about this, but anytime you're staring at somebody or something, your emotions and your facial expressions will influence the psychology or the verbal or the facial outcomes of the person that you're speaking to. It's sort of like the dynamic of like a boss. As soon as your boss walks up to you, the dynamic changes, right? Or when your teacher talks to you about something serious. But he's talking about in the case of psychoanalyzing somebody, Sigmund Freud would just kind of sit over on the couch like this, or on the chair looking off into space, and the other person would just be talking in the opposite direction. And Sigmund Freud thought that that was a better way to get to the heart of people's problems, and it kind of made sense. Like, obviously, when you're talking to somebody, like on a personal or a business level, you got to make eye contact. You can't just sit there and be like, hi, how are you? But in the context of clinical psychology, I think it kind of works. That it would be a better. I've never thought about that. I've never had a therapist that looked off into the other direction, but perhaps that would have made me a little more comfortable, right? And also, I did write a little annotation here referencing Robert Greene. Not sure if you guys can see that. It doesn't really matter, but it sort of reminded me of Robert Greene's law of infection. Sort of this idea of avoiding the unhappy and the unlucky. And Jordan Peterson kind of flips it, and it's called rescuing the damned. It's sort of like this savior complex, right? And a lot of men suffer from it, right? But I think women probably suffer from it too. But that's something to be avoided, is like the savior complex or rescuing the damned. People choose friends who aren't good for them for other reasons. Sometimes it's because they want to rescue someone. This is more typical of young people, although the impetus still exists among older folks who are too agreeable or have remained naive or who are willfully blind. But it's not easy to distinguish between someone truly wanting and needing help and someone who is merely exploiting a willing helper. And I was just like, man, that's so good. That's so true. Like, there's been so many people in my life where it's been kind of hard to decipher what the relationship dynamic is. What are they actually after? And he talks about the Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky. Obviously, you guys know a little bit about Dostoevsky. Make sure you guys go check out my older live streams from like 5 or 6 months ago, but we unpacked one of the Dostoevsky books. Somebody says to help the damned is such something idea. I'm waiting for the comment to pop up there. This is annoying. Like, I can't see what people are fully saying because there's like a giant heart in the middle of the screen there. Is an evil idea, I think, is what Tomes is getting at. Perhaps. But he talks about Dostoevsky's classic Notes from the Underground, which is actually what we did our live stream on a couple months back, which brings with these famous lines: I am a sick man, I am a spiteful man, I am an unattractive man, I believe my liver is diseased. It is the confession of a miserable, arrogant sojourner in the underworld of chaos and despair. He analyzes himself mercilessly, but only pays in this manner for 100 sins, despite committing 1,000. Then, imagining himself redeemed to an underground man, commits the worst transgression of the lot. He offers aid to a genuinely unfortunate person, Liza, a woman on the desperate 19th century road to prostitution. He invites her for a visit, promising to set her life back on the proper course. While waiting for her to appear, his fantasies spin increasingly messianic. So basically, the narrator befriends this prostitute not to really help her or help upright her in society or take her under his wing or anything. He just wants to hang out with somebody briefly that is worse off than him, so he can get like narcissistic supply, right? And he says here, nothing but the narcissism of the underground man is nourished by such fantasies. Liza herself is demolished by them. The salvation he offers to her demands far more in the way of commitment and maturity than the underground man is willing to offer. So he kind of flipped the script there. Like, initially Jordan Peterson was talking about how to avoid the unhappy and the unlucky, perhaps in the words of Robert Greene. Then he talks about how the narcissist will pursue the unhappy and the unlucky, which I never really thought about, but that could be maybe a genre of narcissism. I'm not sure if that would be malignant narcissism or psychological narcissism or something, but to seek out the worse off, the most near-do-well, derelict person you can imagine in order to get to bounce back and forth, perhaps that narcissistic supply. So I thought that was interesting. And he talks about enabling a delusion, which I thought was good. He says here, your raging, what is it? Your raging alcoholism makes my binge drinking appear trivial. My long, serious talks with you about your badly failing marriage convince both of us that you are doing everything possible and that I am helping you to my utmost. It looks like effort, it looks like progress, but real improvement will require far more from both of you. He's sort of talking about when we get in relationships or friendships with people that just maybe we're just on so similar terms with that the relationship is not going anywhere, or the two people dragging themselves down or something, and the inability to perhaps change, right? He says, are you enabling a delusion? Is it possible that your contempt would be more salutary than your pity? So I'm not sure exactly where he's going with that. And some of his writing is kind of, a little bit, got to make one more trip to the oven. I'll be right back. I talked about his lack of punctuation and kind of how that kind of irked me, but some of his writing is sort of like the ravings of a madman. Like he's just talking and talking, and it's interesting. Like it's a really good read, don't get me wrong, but some of the stuff is either like stuff you can already figure out on your own, or it's stuff you've already heard from somebody else, but every once in a while he does throw in some gems, My brother says, next time cook before you get on. Yeah, I hate to leave the screen, but I had to, they wanted you to peel the paper off and then cook it for 5 more minutes. So let me see here. What else do we have here? So we make some references to the importance of art and stuff like that. So before we forget, let's cover a little bit of Jordan Peterson's diet. And it's not really related to the book per se. He does sort of talk about some anecdotes of how apparently Michaela was cured of all of her depression and all of her problems by eating beef exclusively. He doesn't eat chicken. He doesn't eat pork. He doesn't eat stuff like that, but beef exclusively, salt, and water is the alleged diet. I don't even know what you would call that. That's like carnivore, like on steroids or something. And I could pull up an article or something, but I don't think it's really that relevant. But I did want to discuss sort of the way, because we see that a lot. I can think of a handful of YouTubers that are sort of in the genre of maybe far right sort of ideologies that sort of promote this meat agenda, but I've never heard of it sort of contextualized or promoted or taken to the extreme that Jordan Peterson and Michaela Peterson have about what they claim they eat. Now, let me know in the chat, do you guys think it's possible or even probable or even apparently the diet is it's not feasible long term. You would just not, it would knock your body out of whack. But according to Jordan Peterson and his daughter, they eat beef, salt, and water, and they don't ever stray from it. And that's just, I have trouble believing that. Maybe he is on some kind of carnivore diet or maybe like a paleo diet, but just eating beef exclusively, that's just completely outrageous. And he sort of he must be trolling, he's got to be trolling, but maybe there is something, maybe, I'm not denying that you can maybe get some benefits, health benefits, or maybe hormone benefits or something from eating meat, maybe in moderation, but I wouldn't imagine that would be too good for your colon or your blood pressure or anything. Maybe if you're eating a certain type of beef or something, but I cannot imagine eating that exclusively. What else would you eat? And he claims like when he cheats on his diet, like he gets horrendously sick. So, and I'm wondering like if he must be being paid by the meat industry or something, but he's never really. It's never really been unveiled what's actually going on there with that weird diet that him and Michaela were sort of promoting. My brother says Andrew should do a mukbang show for half an hour. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Like, we'll try to get to the tail end of this book here and maybe another half an hour or something. And then if there's still some people sticking around, maybe we'll eat a couple bites. Need to lend Art of Seduction to Gratefully Alex, because he can't do Art of Seduction to save for his life. All Cap says, this is the Nepo baby of the Marloverse. Not sure what that's a reference to. But anyway, so it's just outrageous. I mean, like, just the thought of that diet, like, it almost makes you like crave it. Like, yeah, you just want to eat beef exclusively or something. Like, I could see where maybe you could like, but I'm not sure that there's any evidence that it really cured any of his, because apparently Jordan Peterson was very sick and his daughter was allegedly very sick. They had a whole slew of different depression, from everything from depression, anxiety to like physical problems too. And then somewhere along the line, Jordan Peterson got addicted to benzodiazepams. And so it's just a little bit of like sort of the something rotten in the state of Denmark, as Shakespeare would say. There's like there's part of the structure of the veneer is cracking, and like and I'm not hating on Jordan Peterson for having an addiction or anything, because we all got addictions, but when you combine sort of the he was like a Xanax addict or whatever, and then he's like this ultra beef eater. I don't even know what to call that diet exactly, but but he's supposed to be like this real big intellectual, and we see that a lot with a lot of different religious and political YouTubers that claim to know a lot about religion, compassion and stuff like that, but they promote like, they hate on vegans. They hate on vegetarian diets, and, they say if you eat soy, you're a soy boy and all this kind of, and yes, there could be some type of agenda in the soy industry, like, maybe with Kinko Gates or something, Bill Gates, but I'm not saying that that's not a thing, but to totally go the opposite end and just, eat meat, like that just doesn't seem very Christ-like to me. So on page 105, we're getting back to the book here. We digressed a little bit there. History of the Bible and Old Testament God versus New Testament God. So he sort of structures this duality in the book about how to sort of interpret the Old Testament versus the New Testament, and that it was almost a different God, according to Jordan Peterson here says. And he sort of claims that the God of the Old Testament can appear harsh, judgmental, unpredictable, dangerous, particularly on the cursory reading. The degree to which this is true has arguably been exaggerated by Christian commenters intent on magnifying the distinction between the older and the newer versions of the Bible. There has been a price paid, however, for such plotting. Let's see here. He didn't often care what Old Testament people thought either, although he could be bargained with to a surprising degree, as is particularly evident in the Abrahamic stories. Let's see here. So he's sort of constructing this idea that the Old Testament God was more demanding, right? He says, whatever that might have been, whatever he was demanding, however you might have tried to hide from it, you and your children and your children's children were in terrible, serious trouble. And he's sort of talking about like what we see in the early part of, the Old Testament with like, God's scorn on the Egyptians and all the stuff that Abraham, had to go through to sort of appease God and all that kind of stuff. Which is interesting, but he sort of claims that by the time whoever wrote the Bible got to the New Testament, we sort of saw this more compassionate God, perhaps. So I did think that was something worth annotating. I'm trying to see where exactly he went with the New Testament thing. You decide that you will start treating Old Testament God with all his terrible and often arbitrary seeming power as if he could also be a New Testament God, even though you understand the many ways in which that is absurd. I'm trying to see what else he says here about it. The New Testament God is often presented as a different character, although the book of Revelation, with its final judgment, warns against any excessively naive complacency. So that's something else interesting about the New Testament. I haven't gotten through the entire thing yet, but it does sort of seem like the God has a different, maybe slightly different relationship with maybe Christ and also the people surrounding Christ. And obviously Christ still got fucked over and sacrificed and beat up and all that stuff. But it's not quite the same ancient, like all-powerful, scorning, shaking his shaking his index finger at you type of God, maybe that we saw in the Old Testament. He is more the kindly Geppetto, master craftsman and benevolent father. He wants nothing for us but the best. He is all loving and all forgiving, sure. He'll send you to hell if you misbehave badly enough. Fundamentally, however, he's the God of love. So I'm not sure I exactly understand 100% where he's going with that or if I even agree with that. But it is pretty interesting. To sort of think of the different relationships that the individuals in the Bible had with God, and also what are the different relationships that we can have with God. Is there a difference there? I'd be interested to hear from you guys if you guys believe that. Whatever faith you come from, I've kind of been going the Orthodox route lately, like I said, with my family and stuff like that, but I'm not like a religious zealot or like an Orthodox zealot. But I think there's something to be said for orthodoxy, the way that it's sort of the original Christianity. It obviously wasn't the first, but it was sort of on a grander scale. It was more like the original Christianity, the way that maybe the Bible or the philosophies of Christ were meant to be practiced in a religious sense, and also how the writings from the Bible were meant to be celebrated, perhaps. So he has this interesting chapter kind of going on here about chimpanzees. And he talks about how in some ways, we're very, very related to them. Obviously, everybody kind of knows that. But he says, bluntly put, chimpanzees conduct intertribal warfare. Furthermore, they do it with almost unimaginable brutality. The typical full-grown chimp is more than twice as strong as the comparable human, despite the smaller size. Goodall reported with some terror the proclivity of the chimps she studied to snap strong steel cables and levers. So where is he going with this exactly? He's sort of juxtaposing the way that we should remind ourselves sort of where we come from. Like humans are not infallible to violence. Humans are not infallible to emotional problems, mental problems, aggression perhaps. So that was just a little antidote that he sort of gave us. And like I said, you have to kind of read this book for yourself to really get... Okay, so we did finally find that part about the kid that wanted to go downstairs and watch Elmo. I'm not going to recap that because we already discussed it. But he does have this interesting part here. Old Testament is like the first four Metallica albums. Yeah, that could be partially... I like the deep fake autos of Jordan Peterson. Somebody the other day in my other chat when we were just on the other night kind of bullshitting, somebody said he sounds like Kermit the Frog, and he kind of does. Jordan Peterson sounds like Kermit the Frog. So he says here, life in truth is very hard. Everyone is destined for pain and slated for destruction. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that. Sometimes suffering is clearly the result of a personal fault, such as willful blindness, poor decision making, or even malevolence. So we're sort of talking about, and he goes into this little monologue about Leo Tolstoy. And I read War and Peace. I'm not like a huge Leo Tolstoy scholar, but I do plan on reading Anna Karenina and some of his other books, because Leo Tolstoy was sort of the opposite of Dostoevsky, but like as Jordan Peterson says, Leo Tolstoy was more like a what do you call it, a sociologist, whereas Dostoevsky was more like a psychologist. But some of these themes that come up in Jordan Peterson, like he's riffing on Leo Tolstoy, he's riffing on the Bible, he's riffing on, Dostoevsky. But he says here, Leo Tolstoy himself began to question the value of human existence. He reasoned in this way: my position was terrible. I knew that I could find nothing in the way of rational knowledge except a denial of life, and in faith I could find nothing except a denial of reason. This is why I had to keep the ropes and the guns away from myself. So Leo Tolstoy went through like a really depressive episode, I think around the time he wrote Anna Karenina, and he thought he was going to kill himself and all this stuff. So that's just, he's drawing some interesting parallels there. We're going to fast forward a little bit here. So he does cover the book of Genesis quite extensively. Got 9 people in the chat. Thanks for sticking around, guys. I've never seen Jordan Peterson and Kermit the Frog in the same room. Yeah, that is pretty suspicious. The postmodernists, the neo-Marxists are going to take over the college campuses. So he talks a little bit more about the book of Genesis, right? Shout out to everybody in the chat. Really appreciate it. I haven't done a live stream in a really long time, but I do plan on doing more. The next one's going to be the horror, occult literature, horror live stream. So we'll have that planned for whenever we decide on it, which will be soon. So is there anything interesting in this chapter? He just kind of covers the book of Genesis, and he sort of puts the relationship dynamic of Adam and Eve in sort of a moral structure, how we invented ritual. In the Garden of Eden, prior to the dawn of self-consciousness, so goes the story, human beings were sinless. Our primordial parents, Adam and Eve, walked with God. Then, tempted by the snake, the first couple ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of like, everybody knows that old cornball, Eve took the apple and all that stuff. But he puts that in the context of the delay of gratification. You can see my annotations there, how he sort of uses that as a really brilliant metaphor for delayed gratification, almost like the previous theme where he was talking about just because something is fun does not make it good. So that's, he's sort of riffing on similar topics that he's kind of already talked about, but he's sort of putting them on, a different, maybe a religious pedestal or something. There's little difference between sacrifice and work. Yeah, but I'd rather be on a beach in Mexico with my girlfriend. But more importantly, work is delay of gratification. But that's a very mundane phrase to describe something of such profound significance. And he says here, the discovery that gratification could be delayed was simultaneously the discovery of time, and with it, causality, I'm not sure what that word is, at least the casual force of voluntary human action. Long ago, in the dim mists of time, we began to realize that reality was structured as if it could be bargained with. So what he's essentially saying there is that we created work as a way to get away from the evils of idleness. Idle time is like the devil's playground, right? So whether or not you believe that, it's nice to have idle time, right? But too much idle time, and I've seen it time and time again, when people have too much idle time, it's not good. That's why some of the most successful people, worked like menial labor their whole life or whatever, because they didn't have a lot of idle time, and they were forced to sort of cram in that real important creative time, right? So then he goes in this little monologue about Socrates, and he talks about how Socrates was put on trial in the city of Athens His accusers provided him with plenty of opportunity to simply leave and avoid the trouble, but the great sage had already considered and rejected this course of action. His companion Socrates first answered that he had been preparing his whole life to defend himself, but then said something more mysterious and significant. When he attempted specifically to consider strategies that would produce acquittal by fair means or foul, or even when merely considering his potential actions at the trial, he found himself interrupted by his divine sign, his eternal spirit, force of daemon. So he's kind of talking about this ancient Greek stuff, but he talks about how Socrates, was like ready to go into the fire pit or whatever. Like, I don't think they were. I think they were just going to exile him or something, put him on trial, exile him, because a lot of these philosophers were getting too much power, maybe in the ancient world, and the government officials, the religious officials were threatened by this new. They were kind of like the postmodern Marxists of their age, right? And that's the thing we forget. Like when we read maybe even the Bible or old Greek philosophy or even stuff from the Renaissance, like that was kind of like the progressive liberal literature at the time. Nowadays, it's kind of considered like this antiquated, maybe even conservative, sort of type deal. But back then, it was kind of like that was like the postmodernism of that time. So we're getting towards the halfway point here, and he talks a little bit here about. That is not to say that Christianity, even its incompletely realized form, was a failure. Quite the contrary, Christianity achieved the best high possible, or something, the well nigh possible. The Christian doctrine elevated the individual soul, placing slave and master, commoner and nobleman alike on the same metaphysical footing, rendering them equal before God and the law. Christianity insisted that even the king was only one among many. Now, you could definitely kind of peel that apart. Like, it's true, but it's not true. Like, and what he's sort of getting at is that, like, in the ancient world, it was kind of like, I'm not an expert on paganism or whatever, but there was a lack of structure, perhaps. There was a lack of, maybe way, it was sort of like you could do anything to get in touch with the gods, and they would maybe give you whatever you wanted, but there was no structure behind it. There was really no rationale behind it. There was no sort of moral element to it. And this is interesting here. I did make some annotation. The society produced by Christianity was far less barbaric than the pagan, or so he claims. Right? Like that's a fallacy right there. But we'll kind of hear him out here. Even the Roman, the ones it displaced, Christian society at least recognized that feeding slaves to ravenous lions for the entertainment of the populace was wrong, even if many barbaric practices still existed. It objected to it, and Christianity objected to infanticide, to prostitution, to the principle that right means right. So it's like it's true, but it's not true, but it's also a fallacy. Like he says, the ancient Rome, the Christians realized that it was unfair to put people to the lions, but then the Christians turn around and burn people at the stake. So it's like, he missed the mark on this one, I think. As the Christian Revolution progressed, however, the impossible problems that it had solved disappeared from view. That's what happens to problems that are solved. And after the solution was implemented, even the fact that such problems had ever existed disappeared from view. Then and only then could the problems that remained less amiable. So you know what I mean? Like, he's a little bit crazy. And I'm not saying like, I'm saying I sort of agree with what he's trying to say, but it's like he's basically claiming that Christianity dug us out of the ancient barbaric evil belly of the pagan world. And it's like, maybe initially that's maybe what it did. And I think it did give structure to society and stuff like that. But, by the time we got to the Renaissance with the Catholic Church, it was like worse than the most pagan Babylon you could imagine. So where exactly is his argument going there? I'm not sure. He's such an academic drag queen with his leather elbow patches. Yeah, he really is. Yeah, Charles and I talked about the earthly realm spirits that used to worship, and that's I think that's what Jordan Peterson was getting at, like the deities themselves, according to Peterson, according to some of the scholarship, were sort of just by default, very chaotic and very unjust. And then he's sort of, suggesting that Christianity offered us a different alternative for a more, just God or something. So then he gets in a little bit more psychology, how to relate to people, stuff like that. Probably nothing you haven't heard. Okay, so there's this little interesting part here. It says, primate dominance, hierarchy, maneuvers, and wit. So that's kind of a long-winded chapter title. But he's sort of he's claiming here, then there's the conversation where one participant is trying to attain victory for his point of view. This is yet another variant of the dominance hierarchy conversation. During such a conversation, which often tends toward the ideological, the speaker endeavors to denigrate or ridicule the viewpoint of anyone holding a contrary position, use selective evidence while doing so, and finally, 3, impress the listeners, many of whom are already occupying the same ideological space. So that's exactly what we talked about in the beginning. So Jordan Peterson is quite aware of that fallacy, but he's still kind of, from my understanding, sort of operates in that universe, like preaching to the choir, never really, and that's almost like what the ancient philosophers did too, like to a certain degree. It was like a bunch of elite, like-minded university brains that just sat around talking to each other. So but I imagine they gained followers, and maybe that's kind of what Christ was in some senses. He was like an ancient philosopher perhaps, but it wasn't on the level of like intellectual propaganda that we see with perhaps philosophy. Like that's the big idea in philosophy, is that everything is about a fallacy, but philosophy in itself, to me, is kind of a fallacy, because there's no way. That's why you can't really argue with a philosopher, because everything is a fallacy, right? And then number 2, any argument that's made or any conclusion that's made can potentially be usurped or potentially be destroyed by the intellectual, really what it is, it's like intellectual narcissism. It's kind of what I think philosophy is. Like there's some interesting philosophers, and I think you can enrich your soul by some of the philosophy and learn about history, but in a nutshell, it's kind of like intellectual narcissism. Tell me what you guys think about that. And it kind of depends on what kind of philosophy we're talking about too. But so he's talking about avoiding. I like this little anecdote. The idea of avoiding things poisons the future. So you have a reference to the Rotten in the State of Denmark by Shakespeare, because the avoidance of our relationships, the avoidance of our problems, of our spirituality, just causes you, and we kind of all know that, right? Just causes us to sink into a deeper hole. Let's see here. We're almost to the end, guys. I do promise. Okay, so he's talking about this guy that he grew up with. We're getting towards the tail end of the book here. He was like, he hung around with a lot of ne'er-do-wells, evidently, back in Alberta, Canada, wherever the heck he's from. So he's talking about this ne'er-do-well guy that he was kind of trying to help, and we've kind of all done this in our life, right? Opened our door to the less fortunate, or but he says here, maybe I picked up some change in scent that night when death hung in the air. Chris had a very bitter odor. He's talking about his old friend. He showered frequently, but the towels and the sheets picked up the smell. It was impossible to get them clean. He's talking about his friend when they were young, and Jordan Peterson let this guy Chris into his house. It was the product of a psyche and a body that did not operate harmoniously. A social worker I knew who also knew Chris told me of her familiarity with that odor. Everyone in her workplace knew of it, although they only discussed it in hushed tones. They call it the smell of the unemployable. So that kind of reminds me of like some people that I've worked with in the past. It's like, I don't know what he's getting at there, but I've worked around some stinky people. I've been around some stinky people, but the ones I knew were employed, and they're still employed. So I'm not exactly sure what he's getting at. I think maybe he's referencing, but I just wrote shocking here because it's just such a shocking idea. The smell of the unemployable. What is he talking about? Maybe he's talking about more like an emotional stink or something. But I just kind of thought that was interesting. Then he talks about some other things here. Okay, so toward the end of the book, he sort of deconstructs or he challenges, I should say, the way that society is going, with all the women going off to college, right, rejecting childbirth. And by the time they get into the 30s and 40s, like, yeah, they have successful careers, they have lots of money, they might even have a successful relationship, but they're not necessarily fulfilled in the way that a mother is fulfilled. And he says here, the increasingly short supply of university-educated men poses a problem of increasing severity for women who want to marry as well as date. First, women have a strong proclivity to marry across or up the economic dominance hierarchy. They prefer a partner of equal or greater status. This holds true cross-culturally. Now, every once in a while, there's like a wild card. There's always exceptions, right? Like, the corniest exception of all is like Rose and Jack Dawson, right, from Titanic. And he says here, the same does not hold, by the way, for men who are perfectly willing to marry across or even lower. This is according to data that Jordan Peterson has collected, although they show a preference for somewhat younger women. I don't know what he means by that. Maybe that's true. The recent trend towards the hollowing out of the middle class has also been increasing as resource-rich women tend more and more to partner with resource-rich men. Because of this, and because of the decline in high-paying manufacturing jobs for men, 1 of 6 men of employable age is currently without work in the U.S. So, and that's sort of what we see, in the modern trajectory is women getting educated, which is all fine and well, right? But we see this change in the relationship dynamic in the dating pool and in the marriage atmosphere. And it does sort of knock the natural balance out of things, in my opinion, And I'm not saying like, because I'm saying this with honesty because like, I'm in my mid 30s now and I'm not, very wealthy, and I'm not really able to, I wouldn't be able to get married and have a kid or anything like that right now. I could have a successful relationship and do well on that front, but and like I said, there's always exceptions, but I think there's something to be said for, I think men are basically going to have to get used to sort of the up-and-coming generation of women may be more successful or financially stable than them, and that's something that the male demographic perhaps will have to sort of face. We're sort of living in a different, it's not like it was in my dad's age where you could just, get a job when you're 18 and move out, and things are much more complicated now, right? So I think we sort of see that. So I think it's important to, you don't want to think too much about financial status when you're dating or when you're pursuing relationships, but at some point it does kind of come in, because at some point somebody's going to be the wife, somebody's going to be the stay-at-home mom, somebody's going to be the stay-at-home dad, right? So those are things that have not really been addressed, but at the same point in time, we sort of have this world we're living in now where women don't even want to have kids and they don't even want to be women anymore. So where does that leave the continuance of the human species? Like the sort of the I hate to say the liberal movement or the progressive movement, teaches women to go to college and be lawyers, and they don't get out till they're like 30. It takes a long time to get a college degree. I'm still trying to get mine, and I'm almost 40. I can't imagine being a woman and getting out of college or being in college when you're 35, 40, then you get out and it's like it's too damn late to have kids. So, I'm not saying you should have kids like when you're not able to, I'm not saying every person should get out of high school and have like 5 kids or anything like that, but I'm saying it's just a weird, not romantic situation, but it's a weird sort of, the gender roles are very complicated now in terms of a lot of different things. Where women they don't really want to be women in a lot of ways now. Like, I haven't met any women that want to have kids. I'm not even saying like on a personal level, but like a lot of women that I talk to, I'm not even talking about on a romantic level, but just a lot of women are just not interested in having kids. And I do think that could be partially because society has changed and men and women can't necessarily afford to be burdened with a kid. Maybe that's part of it too. But I do think it's sort of like because everybody's in college, and all the women are in college and all the men are working at Starbucks or whatever, and it's thrown the whole trajectory of I mean, it's never too late, and like I said, there's always exceptions, but it's complicated. You know what I mean? So that's pretty much as far as we got. My bookmark is actually right here, as you can see. So we got about another 25, 30 pages of Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life. We covered sort of the controversial stuff about his weird meat diet. We talked about his wife, Tammy, adopting kids, which was never really explained. What does that mean? Is she going to Africa and adopting like 50 kids like Madonna does? In that case, I would definitely raise an eyebrow. We talked about Jordan Peterson's benzodiazepam addiction. We talked about some of his elite connections and how he potentially might get away with a lot of the stuff that he gets away with, like Howard Stern. I don't want to get on a rant about Howard Stern, but, if you're Howard Stern, you can get away with it, And I think it has something to do with, the media club that he's in. I guess we'll just put it that way. So I'm just going to read the chat here, kind of open up the chat and just hang out with you guys for a couple minutes. My throat's getting a little dry. Hope you guys enjoyed the expose on Jordan Peterson. I'm trying to figure out if I should pull up the chat on my computer. I guess I'll just read it on my phone here. In terms of Jordan Peterson, I would say you sort of find him in a time in your life where it's like, you're being bombarded by the mainstream media and you're looking for sort of an alternative. And then you kind of start reading his books and you learn a little bit more about him. But I don't worship the guy or anything. I think he's funny. I think he's got some good ideas. But I think, that's kind of why we made this video, was just to sort of talk about some of the cracks in his story or just the weird things that kind of come up. He did just kind of, he sort of took the world by storm overnight, and partially that was part of YouTube. But is there something else going on there? I think that's kind of what we're kind of getting at in a nutshell. Newly Awakened says, it's so interesting nowadays hearing men saying how much they don't want kids. When I was younger, it was the opposite. Yeah, it could have been. I mean, we still have certain sectors of society that it's part of their culture, even where they go out and have reckless sex or non-committal sex, and they have 5 or 6 kids from 3 or 4 different women, and I'm not necessarily even knocking that, but those fathers, and the majority of them, don't really give a shit about their kids. If you want to do that and you're rich or something and you can afford to, if that's the lifestyle you want to live, whatever, but it's if you're bringing kids into the world and not take care of them. Madonna mocks womanhood. She isn't a feminist. Yeah, she's not really she's a feminist in the sense of how vulgar can I be, right? She's like the Hugh Hefner feminist. I don't know why I'm looking at my phone. I thought I was broadcasting on here. I'm trying to read the chat, but yeah, Madonna's definitely not a feminist. She's like a feminist in the sense of how vulgar she can be. But Tom Denny says Joshua 4:16, kill them all. I'm not sure who you're referring to there. That sounds pretty dark. Bring the camera back to full view. What do you mean? Oh yeah, let me change the scene here. My brother just called me homie. I'm not sure how I feel about that. So, I hope you guys learned something about Jordan Peterson. I could sit here and talk all night about relationships, but what I was sort of getting at was, I hate to judge other people's lifestyle, but if you're not going to take care of your kids, that's bad if you're the man. But number two, women not wanting to have kids, that's their issue as well. That's their prerogative, but it does sort of, change the trajectory. And even me, my brother and myself, we're sort of a product of a family dynamic that had kids really late. My mom was really late, and she was grew up in that postmodern world where women went to college and they do whatever until they're 38, and they wake up one day and they say, we're ready to have kids. And I'm really glad to be here, and I think I was brought here for a reason. But, it's, I don't know. I think what they're sort of, the information, it's almost like they're brainwashing people to not want to procreate or something, Mom was 38. Yeah, I mean that's like just in time, but like maybe that's why I'm a little slow. We almost were not born. I know. We almost were not born. Fantasizing podcasting with you. Can only imagine what that means. Gotta build up those live stream throat muscles. Yeah, I mean, I could have kept talking. We talked, what, an hour and a half about Jordan Peterson, a little over an hour. Someone says, man, you're based as fuck. I still don't even really know what that means. Does that just mean like red pilled or something? Is that kind of what that means? But, I kind of riff on like some of the other, YouTubers that I watch, and I think they're funny. Like my content is, hold on a second. Yeah, just call me in like 2 minutes, okay, Charles? So my content is sort of like, it's structured around semi-serious topics like literature and stuff like that, but I'm kind of just in a nutshell when I start throwing out, Marxist, and I'm just kind of riffing on, because I think it's really funny, and that's kind of how I got into learning how to deconstruct a lot of the stuff in literature or movies or society. Like, I didn't really know that we were being lied to, and that there was, some conspiracy going on, and but it's that's kind of you either find that kind of content or you don't, and you just kind of live like in the blue pill world or something. But even when I talk about those ideologies or those terms, like, I don't necessarily believe, the far right agenda or the anti woke agenda. I'm definitely not what I would say woke, and that's a topic for a whole nother video, but I'm sort of just in between. I'm just sort of a truth seeker. I'm trying to find the truth. I'm trying to pull down the veneer, the layers of, just foolery and conspiracies and all this stuff with Kinko Gates and, Kinko Fauci and Kinko Biden and Kinko Trump. I'm trying to figure out, what's, and maybe a lot of it is kind of a distraction too. Like, none of it is really that important, right? But it's just kind of where we're at with things. So I think my brother Vegan Cheetah wanted to call me, so I'm going to wait for him to call. I wanted to show you guys the lasagna, but I don't really feel like unplugging the computer right now. Now I have this book I have to read now. The lady in the floral department gave me this cool book called UFO of God. It does sound a little bit, false, but it does sound really interesting. It talks about like UFO abductions and stuff like that. Hello?
Hey, what's up, Andrew?
Hey, not much.
I wanted to say this live stream was very good, very well produced, very well done.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think the entire chat did. It was very interesting,
I appreciate you bringing some people in. It's a little bit like academic based, but I think it's pretty cozy. I think we could grow the concept, maybe have some guests on and stuff like that too at some point.
I like your outfit. It definitely, goes along with the professional content.
Yeah. And that's sort of what I was telling the viewers too, like, I'm not a master scholar or like a master academic, but I do like the pursuit of sort of forming your own like academic pursuit, I guess you could say, if you want to go.
Talk about Jordan Peterson just for a second.
Yeah, you got some questions or comments? What do you think about some of the things we hit?
You had mentioned something about he was associated with the UN. To my knowledge, I'll have to go back and actually verify this, but I believe he was like a speech writer.
Right, yeah.
The United Nations.
He wrote scripts or something. I'm not sure what his involvement was or how well connected he was, but that's a red flag right there, just in terms of
red flag.
I think what I mean by that is, like, I'm not saying he's necessarily this all nefarious evil force, but I think he's propped up and he was pushed into society, to influence the future generation of voters or something, just like any other YouTuber is or something,
It's kind of like the, we always talk about the rags to riches story.
Yeah, it's not. There's something else there, you know.
There's got to be, like, he was like just this unknown anonymous professor, and just based on his intelligence and charisma alone became the character that is Jordan Peterson today. I don't know if I buy that.
Right. I think that there. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was getting at. You know, I think there's a lot of questions to like where the hell he came from. You know, where did he get all that clout?
He has a lot of funding too. I don't know if you know this, but on Patreon, he makes about $30,000 a month.
Yeah, he from his viewers allegedly.
Well, what I'm thinking is some of these platforms are used. Actually, graphically Alex was talking about this in context with me on YouNow a few years ago. I think it's possible that there could be like dark money. What do you want to call it? Deep state money, or
I'll be right back. I'm just gonna go grab something. I'm still on the phone. Yeah. So you said you can hold that thought. I'm just grabbing something.
I'll just hold it. You call that to the stream.
Yeah. Just. So you said like a deep state influence of sorts.
Well, I think some of these platforms potentially could be used as a way for, darker entities behind the scenes to funnel and fund certain, individuals, certain personalities, certain projects.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of what I was getting at with like he taught at Harvard and everything, so that in itself, like he was kind of already an elite, and it's not to say that like he doesn't have credentials. Obviously, he earned his degrees and all that stuff, but somewhere along the line, or maybe even he was just born into it, he was sort of able to ascend sort of the hierarchy of modern politics and stuff like that. So yeah.
It just seems to me like to become that big, like that influential. I mean, yes, he's intelligent, he's articulate, he's interesting, he's got some charisma. But it just seems to me, they're trying to sell us the rags to riches story, even with Jordan Peterson. And in my opinion, it's possible. One could speculate that it does take funding and, connections, like you said, that not everybody has access to.
Yeah. Can you guys in the chat hear what? I'm just wondering if they can hear you talking on the phone. I'll try to keep it close to the mic, but
yeah, it should be good.
But so what? Yeah, because you read the same book, and like I think like me, you were kind of maybe under the spell, so to speak, of Jordan Peterson during the far.
Time,
so like,
yes.
Looking back now, like, what do you think of some of the things we covered, like about his addiction or his meat diet or his the way that his daughter is all of a sudden now just as famous as he is, and it's
Well, as far as the meat diet goes, I mean, I think he's.
You think he's lying?
He's obviously not a nutritionist or anything.
Right.
I mean, I would never be interested in trying, the all meat, salt, water diet, and it's just steak, right? He just eats beef.
Right, but the question that raises the question: is that even real, or is it? Do you think he's just like trying to appeal to like all the anti-meat heads that are like conservative or something? You know what I mean?
Right. Yep. True. It could be more of an image.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I do that with veganism. I don't keep a 100% vegan diet.
Yeah.
I still promote myself as mainly vegan. I mean, because I kind of am.
Yeah.
As far as his, what was the second part you said? His, you talked about the diet, but there was something else.
Well, yeah, because I remember you were the first one that told me about his, his benzodiazepam addiction, and you sort of felt that he lost credibility, and he's actually addressed this a little bit, and he said that, well, if people want to jump ship, from following me just because, I had a failure, then that's their prerogative, but like I think it does in some ways. It doesn't make him uncredible, but it's like. He was supposed to be this great whatever, and then somebody was feeding him benzodiazepams, and he got all screwed up, and it's like, what was he doing? He was even accused of, I don't know what the actual root of it was, if there's any source, but he was accused of like misconduct with one of his clients or something. So I don't know.
As far as the benzodiazepine addiction, I mean, he probably was taking them for anxiety because he's a
Yeah.
public speaker.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right?
That makes sense, but maybe they were being fed to him by corrupt people,
like handlers.
Control him.
Do you think he has handlers potentially, like that type of deal?
Potentially, yes. I mean, I'd have to do a deeper dive into him, but I mean, he's at a certain level. He's at a certain level with funding. He's at a certain level with connections to the media. We know he did work with the UN in some capacity, but he's only human too.
Right.
So
yeah.
I think
that's sort of what I was getting at.
Worshiping him right back in 2000. I mean, people still do. But meanwhile, he himself is hooked on benzodiazepines, and that's a very serious type of medication.
Yeah, it's awful, according to him.
Russia, I think, and this was another weird thing.
Yeah, why Russia?
I don't know, but that's where he went to rehab and detox.
Weird, huh?
It is kind of weird, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
I would like to see you do a Robert Greene breakdown and talk about 48 Laws of Power, because this book, 12 Rules for Life, it is very much in the vein of some of those Robert Greene books.
Yeah, it definitely dovetails with a lot of that stuff for sure.
And I think the Robert Greene books are much more dense with content that you could talk about.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, I just wanted to say hello and congratulate you on the stream here. You're doing a Halloween stream soon too?
Yeah, I think it's going to be planned for Monday evening. And I still got to get you and Marissa over to, have a Halloween night and watch Beetlejuice or whatever. So we'll do that too. Let me know if you guys are going to the service tomorrow too. They're having a Vespers.
Do
you know what that is? Tim?
We may try to make it there.
Yeah. Tim told me it was some saint that they're having a Vespers service. I forgot what he said, but it should be fun.
I thought it was for Kefalonia.
Well, yeah, it's like it has something to do with that, but it's like linked.
Saint from the island.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, so.
And we will be at your art show. I'll hang up the phone now, but tell everybody about your art show.
Okay, I'll talk to you later.
All right.
All right.
Talk to you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks. So yeah, I'll show you guys the flyer. Well, I can't really show you the flyer here. But they're having a little thing at their university, and they're going to hang up, I'm taking a drawing class I'm pursuing a master's in art history with a minor in studio art. So I'm taking a lot of art classes, and they're going to be hanging all the students' work. And it was like an original drawing that we had to do like the first part of the semester, but by this point in the semester, he wants us to like Halloweenize it, like Halloweenify it. So basically, I took some acrylic paint, I splattered it on there to make it look like blood or something, and then I have like a big toy spider hanging up on the corner. Some of you guys might have seen it on Instagram. So it's going to be like a Halloween night at the university. It's going to be pretty cool. Charles and I will probably live stream it, so you guys can, have that to look forward to. And I'm just going to pull up the comments again, see what you guys are saying. Almost 10 o'clock. I still haven't eaten dinner yet. Beetlejuice is a comedy or horror film. Well, that's under speculation. I actually plan on doing a live stream about Beetlejuice at some point because, like, my dad was telling me not to tell Marissa that it's a horror movie. And like, it's not a traditional horror movie, right? But when we're talking about Beetlejuice, like, it's creepy beyond belief. I mean, it's a funny movie. It's goofy. It's a great watch. But like, if you watch it with a more like experienced mindset, like as you understand how creepy it really is. It's about exorcisms, and then Beetlejuice tries to marry like a teenage girl at the end. So it's like, it's all like Hollywood Freemasonic, devil worship really is what it is. But it's a funny movie. It's a great story, but some people think it's goofy. I think it's creepy. I think the makeup is creepy. I think the whole aesthetic of the movie is really creepy. It's not like a Michael Myers movie or something. It's not like Rosemary's Baby. It's not necessarily that level of creepy, but it is really unsettling, I would say. Yeah, it's kind of disturbing, but it's a great watch, Beetlejuice is fun. I'm going to rewind a little bit here. Jordan's aversion to Trudeau piqued my interest, but he lost me along the way. Yeah, he talks a lot about Jordan Trudeau and who's that other guy? Julian Assange, or Russell Brand's always talking about that. He's an eloper. You have to really watch him at times. Yeah, and I think a lot of these people, like, they're kind of like chameleons, you know. They might be working with both hands, you know, the left and the left-hand path as well as the right. There's a lot of speculation about Jordan Peterson and his daughter disappearing 4 times. Having a lot, yeah, something, yeah. I'm glad Newly Awakened said that because, yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff going on with him and Michaela. I'm not saying it's going on between them, but there's something there because they've maybe disappeared, or there's some kind of plastic because Jordan, I don't even, like, Jordan Peterson used to be kind of like chunky, and he was kind of disheveled. You look at him from like 10, 15, 20 years ago, he looks like, you know, the average, you know, intellectual, you know, professor, just like some brain, you know. But now he's like more mature, and he's got a beard, and he's all skinny, and he claims that all of that is from the meat diet, which I have trouble believing. You know, someone needs to follow him or go through his trash. I gotta say, like, I think the Graphically Alex drama is really funny, and I would like to see Charles and Graphically Alex get on camera and, you know, duke it out or whatever. And I was even willing, I kind of just brushed this by Charles. It's kind of like a joke, but I was even willing to have, you know, Jasmine and Charles and Marissa all, like, and I would be like the mediator, you know. That they probably don't want to go that route, but I did think that would be funny just to kind of get some stuff going. But he's considered high functioning, but he has a lot of traits of autism. So you have an autistic son. Yeah, I have a lot of friends that have autistic sons. And I wonder if, like, I don't know, I hate to get into vaccines and all that, but seems to be a lot of autism going around. I mean, I think I have, like, I think I could potentially be on the spectrum. I was never diagnosed, but I do have something called dyscalculia or dyscalculia, which forms a very, very debilitating disability in math and, like, numbers and like, it's very hard for me to learn foreign languages. It's hard for me to do math problems, and I'm still struggling now in college to get through it. That's partially why it's taken me so long to get through college, is because of that disability. But I think it could just be a form of autism that hasn't been diagnosed. I think Peterson is the most cited psychologist of the modern era. He was quite famous. But yeah, that's a good point too, Newly Awakened. He was a little famous even before he was famous. What happened to the veggie lasagna, Tom Denny asked. It's still in the works. It's done. I'm probably going to get off camera here in a little bit. I really love, you know, I'm just having a good time talking to you guys. But I don't want to keep you guys all night. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Maybe we can do another Jordan Peterson stream, and we'll talk about Maps of Meaning, which is his other book. So, you know, I think he's an interesting character in sort of the modern political universe. I kind of like how my brother said that Graphically Alex is an interesting character in the Marlowe-verse, you know, and even if a lot of these people are weird or they're sci-vamps or whatever, there's a lot of interesting characters, and I think you can sort of apply that philosophy to YouTube as a whole, or politics, or whatever it is you're into. You know, there's a lot of authors that are despicable people, but they're interesting characters, you know. So we're going to be doing we're going to be covering a lot of material, like I said. The next stream is going to be, you know, more geared towards fall, Halloween. We're going to be talking, and I still have to watch all these movies before the live stream, because I kind of want to just, you know, talk a little bit about the movies, refresh my memory. But we got The Howling, which is like an occult werewolf book. Really interesting sort of psychosexual horror book about werewolves. Then we got Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House, which is more like an intellectual haunting. There's a little bit of Skittles stuff in here, you know, between two women. There's some Ouija boards. So, you know what I mean? Like, you just can't make this shit up in a book. Well, literally, you can, I guess. My brother always said that you can't make it up in a book, but sometimes you can. And then lastly, but not leastly, we have Frank De Felita's The Entity, which is, yeah, I'm going to save that for the live stream, but I just want to, you know, talk a little bit about that. And I got to go eat, and finish my Corona. And I will talk to you guys next time. And I'm sure we'll get, you guys can chime into the replay and just leave further comments or little rabbit holes if you think I should go down, little anecdotes or whatever. And I'm going to attempt to end the stream here. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I got a really busy day tomorrow. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing. And we'll talk to you guys next time. I feel like I'm ending one of my YouTube videos. And we'll talk